Callum, how are you, mate? You all right?
Yeah, I'm all good. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. We at the TPA have done a new paper.
We have.
Well, briefing note, I suppose we should say, again, on Quangos as part of our Britain's Quangos Uncovered campaign. And it's called the Quango Database. And I think this is actually a really key part of our overall project and investigation into Britain's quangocracy because, as I'm sure you'll go into it, it sort of reveals the size and scope and even the cost of the Quango state, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I think a big problem when we look at quangos is the names thrown about a lot. Individual ones are hammered a lot in the press, but there's no real good way to look at all of them and then to work out how much do they cost as a whole, how many staff do they have as a whole. And the aim of the database is to really highlight that, to say that, okay, individually each one is bad, but just look at how bad they are when they're all put together, when you look at it as lump sums.
Yeah, you're right. And I think often when people talk about quangos and the quangocracy, and I know I've been I had this problem in the past, where when you just talk about it in the sort of abstract without relating it to cost, without relating it to a sort of wider nexus of things, it can get a bit sort of people can shrug their shoulders and go, oh well, he's just making excuses for poor governance. But as we actually know, quangocracy is no joke, right? And these guys do have quite a lot of power and do have a lot of our money. So I suppose the first thing we should get into is like, okay, tell us some of the things that you guys on the research team found about quangos overall.
Well, I think the headline figures is 438 of them, and that uses the Cabinet Office's metric. So they publish an arm's length body list. They call it their data landscape analysis of arm's length bodies. So this is using the Cabinet Office's terms so that we can say, some people might say, oh, NHS trusts are quangos, police services are quangos. We say, no, we'll use what the Cabinet Office defines them as.
Okay.
So there's 438 of them. We then took their data, the ones that didn't publish in there, we sent Freedom of Information requests to or used their annual accounts where we could to find how much they were spending and how much they received from taxpayers. And they spend just over 400 billion and receive 376 billion from taxpayers. So that's greater than any individual government department, and it's greater than the GDP of Norway.
Norway, really?
Norway,
I didn't know that figure specifically. Wow, that's not a small amount of cash, right? You think £376 billion a year that they've received from government funding. Why is it then when you look at, say, an overall pie chart of government spending, as you said earlier, like it's bigger than any area of government spending, I'm presuming because of the way quangos operate in the sense that they're all part of different departments and deal with different things, they're sort of included in those overall budgets for each section. If am I correct on the ball there?
Most of them are funded through grants that they receive in order to perform a specific function. Others charge a levy on industries. So say like the Construction Industry Training Board, for example, they charge an industry on a levy on construction companies in order to regulate them. The betting industry is another one that has to pay a levy to a quango to regulate themselves. There's one very notable quango that has the authority to charge a sort of tax in the BBC.
Yeah, of course.
And that they reach straight into your pockets and say, well, if you want to watch any TV channel, you have to pay the BBC, which is an arm's length body.
Yeah, which is interesting because people don't consider the BBC to be a quango and sort of complain about it in its own individual little way, but actually, according to the Cabinet Office, it is a quango with a budget of about does it spend or receive about £5.6 billion, something along those lines?
Yes, it's around that.
It's around that. Interesting. No, I think that the interesting thing about all of this, I think, is when we talk about, because obviously we at the TPA talk a lot about wasteful spending and government needing to know where its priorities are. I think it's probably quite clear that one of the easiest savings that any future government, and indeed this government, could make is in the wider administrative state. However, I think when it comes to a big quango, which Labour has abolished, that's NHS England, and that's 160 odd billion pounds a year that it receives from taxpayers, something along those lines. Is the abolition of NHS England going to actually provide any real savings or cost for taxpayers and actually any better efficiency in the overall running of our healthcare system, do you think?
Well, it's 175.
Wow, it's even more.
Yes, even more. And
yeah,
sure, by abolishing that next year when the same data is published, or whenever NHS England is abolished, the year after that, it will look like quango spending's dropped a lot.
Yeah.
Of course, outcomes are not necessarily going to improve because what NHS England does is it takes the money, it receives money from Department of Health, it has this money and then it distributes it to all of the trusts. So that's just being brought back in-house to the Department of Health, which is good in the sense it means the Health Secretary is going to be more accountable for trusts in England, which we welcome. That's a good thing. It should be elected ministers that are ultimately on the hook for poor performances, as they're the ones that are answerable to the ballot box. But will it actually improve any outcomes? So we're just getting rid of the Quango without removing the functions, just removing all of those staff and bringing them in-house, not cutting any of the spending. It's like, well, no, that's not necessarily going to result in any improvements.
Yeah, because I think what people do talk about, I think what we talk about when we talk about quangocracy is you're so right, is the function element of it. Because politicians, I think Cameron fell for this a little bit when he was in power. I think Cameron was one of the first people to coin this sort of bonfire of the quangos thing, and that got everyone very excited. But actually, his bonfire ended up costing more than actually it saved. And also, he actually ended up allowing, was it like 5 out of 6 quangocrats to keep their jobs in the end, basically. And also, like you said, none of the real functions of many of these quangos were just abolished in their entirety. They just moved to a bigger quango or to a department or whatever it might be. And actually, getting rid of the quangocracy is not just about saving money and making things more transparent and streamlined. It's about getting rid of large areas of governance which the state simply shouldn't be doing, right?
Well, a big problem that we saw, particularly through the sort of Cameron era, is he created 54, by the way, which is the third most of any prime minister. But a big problem with it, yes, okay, you shrunk the civil service, but you can't just outsource those to then non-governmental department bodies such as quangos to do basically the same job. Likewise, when you want to abolish the quango, you can't just get rid of the name of it. Get rid of maybe the 2 or 3 top level staff and then bring the whole lot back into a department.
Sure.
So quangos employ roughly the population of Liverpool. It's about 500,000 people.
Yeah.
So, well, what do? Are they providing value to the UK economy? Are they providing value to taxpayers in the UK? If they're not, then they shouldn't just be moved elsewhere in a department. The whole thing should be abolished in its entirety.
Sure, but of course, even though we've had these discussions before regarding quangos and the sort of wider quango state, it's quite clear that we don't believe in the abolition of every single quango in the United Kingdom, right? I think we should need to avoid discussions that get into that. Which quangos do you think, either you can add ones here that maybe you need reforming and changing or streamlining a bit, but which parts of the quangocracy and which quangos do you think are necessary and should stay? Say for HMRC, probably, for example, you think HMRC should probably stay?
Yeah, I mean, we need some mechanism to collect taxes. Yeah. Obviously, what that looks like could change around. That could be made more efficient. I think there are other things you look at and think, yes, they provide good value. Highways England are a good example. We need to maintain the roads. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, ways to get rid of nuclear waste, especially if we in the future do end up going down a more nuclear fuel route. I think there are lots, and there are hundreds of smaller committees that are sort of 10 people that gather 2 or 3 times a year, and they're experts in a field, and they know that field inside and out, and provide actually very good analysis to people that work in that industry. And think, yeah, sure, but they're not the ones we're talking about. We're talking about the ones that hire tens of thousands of people and spend tens or hundreds of billions of pounds, and really don't see anywhere near the level of outcome that sort of money and that sort of size of an organisation should see. Okay, then, so let's pick up on that last point then. Which quangos do you think are, as you've described, inefficient, don't provide outcomes? Maybe 2 or 3. Which quangos do you think that could just be abolished, their functions abolished, or perhaps their function given back to a democratically elected Secretary of State or Minister? I think big TPA favourite is UKRI. The ones known for funding sort of ridiculous research projects around the world. I think, why on earth taxpayers are funding for this? If higher education institutions wish to fund things on their own dime, brilliant, fine, go for it, I don't care. But why the taxpayer has to fund, we've released 20 stories in the last year alone on ridiculous things funded by UKRI. They'd be quite high up on my list. You look at other ones, HS2 be up there, to think, what a waste that was. If the Department of Transport was able to do it, then they should have done it in-house. If not, then why they created a Quango to manage the project, I have no idea. I think they're two big ones that I would be looking at. Awesome. No, I think what the UKRI on is very interesting, because
You are right. I mean, I think with UKRO, they do fund some scientific research projects, though, I suppose. And their budget is, how large is it? Is it around like...
UKRO, I do have it over here somewhere.
Is it around like 9 billion?
10
billion. 10 billion, right, we're close.
Yeah.
10 billion. So if they are funding a lot of, as we know for a fact they have, and we've seen there, and to be fair, it's publicly available for everyone to go on the internet and see what UKR are funding. There's some fun ones on there. Would you see that UKRI is abolished in its entirety in a new group set up, or a group inside a department set up to specifically do with research stuff? So, for example, if you got rid of all the mental woke stuff out of UKRI, abolished UKRI entirely, and then told all the proper scientific research to go, say, to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, could you see that was a good way to sort of split that Quango up?
Yeah, I think it's a question of what's the job of the government, what's the job of the state. And well, yes, there is a need to, the Ministry of Defence, for example, should be investing and should be investigating new technologies. So I don't have a problem with the government spending on research and innovation in that field, but why they need a whole team of academics funded through universities to do it, I have no idea. So keeping some of them, sure, the ones that provide a use for what the functions of the state should be. Yes, absolutely, but we don't need a Quango to manage that. That should be done through the Department of Defence or through the Department of Health. If it's for healthcare research, it could be managed a lot better. Sure.
I suppose just to go back briefly on the sort of, to bring it back to modern day examples, because obviously these are, while they are modern day, they're all, it's just a database, it's just an explanation, right? There's no real politicisation to it. As you know, Starmer a few months ago said, we're going to do a bonfire of the Quangos, we're going to get rid of them, and then everyone pointed out he set up 20-odd new ones, including the opposite value for money, which is now actually going to be abolished because Treasury Select Committee came out and said, yeah, it's a waste of money and hasn't done anything right. Do you think that, first of all, when you heard Starmer did say that, did you buy his rhetoric, one? And second of all, why do politicians consistently use that kind of rhetoric and then seemingly do either the opposite or completely nothing about it? Why do you think that is?
I know I didn't buy his rhetoric. I think you look at his actual track record and he's setting one up about every 2 weeks so far. Tony Blair, who set up the most, only managed one every 6 weeks over his tenure in office.
Oh, really?
So if Starmer manages to last the time Tony Blair did, he'll well eclipse the 92 that Blair set up. I mean, why do they do it? I think the obvious answer is that ministers actually quite like getting rid of a lot of their responsibilities. They think it means that, we can put this supposed panel of experts on it or this organisation dedicated purely to this one job. And it means when I have to go and explain why something went badly wrong, I can say, it wasn't my fault, the Quango did it wrong. And it may be genuinely true that the Quango was at fault for it. It's actually quite likely, given how much they do, that the Quango is at fault. But it doesn't change the fact that you're the minister, you're the person that was appointed by the Prime Minister to do that job, you're the person that's an elected MP. It should be your responsibility. No one elected the Quango to do it.
No.
And I think there's this sort of cognitive dissonance that goes on with ministers where they like shirking the responsibility, but then sort of feel a bit freaked out when they're sat in front of their constituents or sat on TV and still get blamed for the problems. Because it is still your fault.
Yeah, exactly, because you're the one who outsourced the decision in the first place. And I think the argument that I've always used whenever I've talked about Quangos with other people is that ministers and MPs and whoever it is, they'll come into power. And I think actually Simon Case, who was the former head of the civil service, actually, and he's been there for, he was there for God knows how long. I mean, he was at top, really right at the top. He jokingly said he was the head of the blob, right? That's who he was. And he said that, and it's an opinion I thought for a while, but it's nice to hear confirmed by a really, really senior civil servant, well, the head of the civil service, right? Who said, the problem is MPs promise all these things at elections and in their manifestos, and then they come into power and they realise just how much power has been siphoned away from ministers, parliament, things like that. And they have to deal with this weird web of NGOs, Quangos, civil servants, some taxpayer-funded charities who actually have some more levers who have more ability to make decisions and make change and block things and push things through than even some secretaries of state do. And when you've got the former head of the civil service saying that, you realise that at this point, like, no, this isn't some weird conspiracy theory or a way for people either on the right or the left to sort of, abdicate responsibility and say, oh, it's not really my fault, because I didn't do this. It's like, no, this is a genuine issue. And I think that not just this Quango database work, but some of the work we're going to be doing in the future, which I'm sure you can briefly talk about, is going to sort of talk about how on earth, first of all, we deconstruct these quangos, but also what some of them do and how to put power back in the hands of elected politicians.
I think it's an often overlooked problem. Like I said, they have 500,000 staff on Quango payrolls. You can't just abolish all of them overnight. And even most of them, you couldn't just lay off 300, 400,000 people without expecting some real difficulties then for the economy. So there has to be some understanding that, yes, this will take time. But I think the problem is that we're not seeing any attitudes to actually wanting to get rid of them. All as we're seeing is sort of rebrandings and renamings, while all of the problems, all of the functions, all of the staff, all of the budget remains. It's like, well, yes, on the one hand, it is very difficult for politicians, but we're seeing them consistently try and take the easy road, which is to not really do anything about it. Maybe to change a name, to tinker about and hope that people think, oh, they're actually tackling the problem. It's like, well, then you're not. You do have to, at some point, realise that this is an issue and we're going to take the more difficult decisions. Perhaps slowly, but start at least. And that's not what we're seeing at all.
No, totally. And I suppose the last point, which I included in my previous point, was saying about how with our Britain's Quangos Uncovered project, we've done Quango spending. You did a big piece on how Quangos actually affect big spending projects, how they get in the way. We've done pieces on members of the board, highlighting how many different Quango crits sit on so many different boards, even though they have no relation to each other. And of course, now we have our Quango database. I believe we're going forward with a sort of Quango briefing room idea, which I think you're going to be involved with. So sort of tell us a little bit more about what that will look like.
So it's starting with the 10 best funded Quangos that will still be existing at the time of publishing each one. But rather than, so far, most of our research on it has taken a look at Quangos as a whole. This will break down each of the top 10 Quangos very individually. It will go through why they were founded, who set them up, what they actually do, quite critically, and it will look to say, well, do we need to reform it? Do we need to abolish it? Or is it something that is actually working well and we can keep it?
Right.
So it would be a series looking at an individual Quango each time and then coming to this judgment.
Right, awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing all those briefing notes and those research papers, because I think that is a really, really important piece of work, because, again, I actually don't think anyone's really properly done it before. So Godspeed to you lot for doing it.